My name is Miriam, but it wasn't always that way. I was born Fatima into a traditional Muslim family in the Gulberg neighborhood of Pakistan. Today, I'm 28 years old and live as a refugee with my daughter Noor in a simple little house on the outskirts of Johor. Her name means light in Urdu, and, honestly, I've never known a more fitting name. But to understand how this light came into my life, I need to go back in time, back to the days when everything inside me was darkness. My childhood was surrounded by high walls, both physical and invisible. At home, tradition was law. My father, Mahmoud, was a respected merchant in the Kora Bazaar, a man with a strong voice and final decisions. My mother, silent and submissive, was the living image of what was expected of us women. Obedience, modesty, invisibility. I grew up learning that the outside world was not my place. I was like a flower locked in a courtyard, fragrant, but forbidden to grow freely. I remember the sound of the call to prayer coming from the mosque, 5 times a day. I would kneel on the carpet and recite verses from the Quran I had memorized since childhood. But deep down, it all felt empty. I repeated the words, but the meaning slipped through my fingers like sand. I was told my destiny was already set, to marry, to have children, especially sons, and to disappear behind the veil of obedience. There was no room for questions, only silence. At 17, my father announced my engagement to Rashid, a 32-year-old widower and successful man. It was over dinner. As the aroma of homemade biryani filled the air, my heart sank. I could barely breathe. Rashid wanted a young wife to have the children his first wife couldn't before she died in childbirth. For my father, it was a blessing. For me, it was a sentence. My mother said nothing. He just looked away, but her hands trembled as she poured the tea. It was as if she knew exactly what to expect, because she'd already experienced it. 6 months later, there I was, dressed in a red gown that was too heavy, walking as if carrying a burden. My own wedding felt like a spectacle in which I was merely a supporting character. Rashid's house was grand, lavish, yet chilly. There was no affection, only duty. His mother, the matriarch, welcomed me with a clear order. Your duty is to provide this family with an heir, nothing more. I was reduced to a womb with legs. My desires, my dreams, no one asked. And it was in this place, in this golden prison, that my soul began to cry out. Little by little, a thirst arose within me, a thirst for something more, for something true. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew that what I was experiencing couldn't be all there was. That's when I began to hear, very softly, almost like a whisper, the name of Jesus. The first months of marriage were a silent desert. Rashid would come to my room at night, fulfill what he called his husbandly duty, and leave without even looking me in the eye. There was no affection, no words, just a body beside mine. When the door closed, I was left alone with my tears, kneeling on the floor, begging God for a child. The weight of expectations suffocated me. Each menstrual cycle that arrived without pregnancy was a new sentence of failure. A year later, I finally got pregnant. The house erupted in joy, prayers, and preparations. But just 3 months later, I lost the baby. My world fell apart. The second pregnancy lasted even shorter. The third was terminated before 6 weeks. With each loss, the whispers in the house grew louder. Punishment for some sin, my mother-in-law would whisper to visitors, as if I were a burden shaming the family. Rashid withdrew further and further and began openly talking about taking a second wife if I didn't give him an heir. The nights became endless. I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of failure on my chest like a stone. I prayed until my knees ached. I fasted until I felt weak, but Allah seemed distant, as if he had turned his face away. The emptiness in my belly echoed the emptiness in my heart. I began to wonder if there really was a God who cared about the pain of an invisible woman like me. Just when I'd given up hope, my 4th pregnancy arrived. This time, the baby clung to life with a vengeance. The first trimester passed, then the second, and I finally reached the 8th month with a huge, vibrant belly. The house was filled with preparations, hand-embroidered clothes, colorful blankets, and seemingly endless prayers. Everyone was hoping for a boy to continue the lineage, but deep down, something told me that this child wouldn't be just another heir. He would change everything. On the cold March morning I went into labor, I felt like waves of fire coursed through me. Each contraction was stronger than the last, tearing me from the dream of holding my perfect baby. Rashid ran to get the mother, and together they took me to Jinnah Hospital, the same one where I had lost my other pregnancies. The strong smell of disinfectant mixed with fear seemed to permeate the hallways. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on the pale green walls, and the sound of my moans mingled with the cries of newborn babies coming from other rooms. I remember Begum Rashida pacing the hallway like a caged tiger. Her lips moved in silent prayers, gold bracelets jingling with each nervous step. Rashid, meanwhile, sat in a plastic chair with his head bowed, hands clasped on his knees, swaying slightly like someone praying in a mosque. It was as if everyone there was searching for something: control, hope, salvation, but no one dared speak. Labor lasted 14 hours, 14 hours of raw pain, tearing at my body and soul. But also, with each contraction, a hope grew that it would all make sense, that I would finally hold in my arms the baby who would justify my existence in that house, the child who would give me value, a voice, and who knows, even a little love. When the time came, I felt as if I were surrendering the last part of myself. Dr. Malik, a man with a tired face, a gray beard, and steady hands, took charge. Beside him, the midwife, Nasrin, a robust woman with kind eyes and warm hands, squeezed my hand and said softly, "Hold on, my daughter. You're almost there." And I pushed. With every fiber of my being, with every unanswered prayer, with every tear I'd ever shed in silence. "Here comes the head," someone announced. A shiver ran through me. I was so close to embracing the reason I was still alive. But then, what came was not what was expected. Silence came. Not that calm, peaceful silence. It was a silence that screamed, a silence that cut the air like a knife. I expected that loud cry, that first scream that fills a mother's chest with relief, but nothing, just a terrible emptiness. "Why isn't she crying?" I asked, my voice cracking, my throat dry, and my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. I tried to stand, but exhaustion weighed like iron on my body. Even so, I knew. Before anyone said anything, I knew. It was a girl, not the boy they'd been waiting for. And there was something else, something no one wanted to say. I saw the doctor exchange a look with Nasrin, a tense, worried look. He took a small flashlight from his pocket and shone it into my daughter's eyes, moving the beam back and forth. The tension on his face grew with each passing second, until his expression hardened to stone. "There's a problem," he murmured, carefully wrapping my daughter in a blue blanket, but unable to hide the anguish in his eyes. She didn't react to the light. I already knew. My heart knew. But still, I whispered, "What does this mean?" "Congenital blindness," he replied. Those words fell on me like rocks thrown from a cliff. "We need to run tests to confirm, but the absence of pupillary response is a very clear sign." At that moment, everything stopped. The sounds of the hospital, the footsteps, the cries, the machines, the prayers, vanished. All I could hear was my own heart pounding so hard, like it wanted to explode. It wasn't just my daughter's vision that was at stake. It was her life, and somehow mine too. Everything I had endured, the years of pain, the losses, the contempt, had been for this moment. And now, there she was, a blind girl, not the long-awaited heir, but a child who, in the eyes of everyone there, represented shame, limitation, failure. But strangely, when they placed her in my arms, I felt something different. My arms trembled as I reached out to pick up my daughter. The doctor hesitated for a moment, as if debating whether I was strong enough to handle what had just happened. "Can I, please, hold her?" I asked, my voice breaking, tears already streaming silently down my face. When they finally placed her in my arms, everything around me disappeared. The world felt small. It was just me and her. I saw the most beautiful little face I'd ever seen. Her skin was the color of the chai latte my mother made on cold mornings, and her little hands fluttered in the air as if searching for something the world refused to offer. Her eyes, however, remained firmly closed. It wasn't sleep. It was as if she simply didn't want to open her eyes to a world that had already hurt her, even before she saw it. "My little Noor," I whispered against her warm forehead. The name escaped my lips like a prayer. Noor. Light. My light. Even though her eyes never saw the light of this world, there was a light in her that I couldn't explain. A presence that silenced my pain, if only for a moment. But the moment was short-lived. Rashid entered the room with stiff steps, followed by Begum Rashida. There was anxiety on their faces, but when the doctor explained the situation, That anticipation turned to something cold, cruel. Rashid repeated the word blind, as if it were dirty, as if the sound burned him inside. Blind? He said loudly, his voice rising in pitch and anger. This is a punishment from Allah. Rashid, please. I tried to speak, searching for any sign of compassion in his eyes, but he silenced me with a brusque gesture. I flinched instinctively. You sinned, Fatima. This is your fault. It has to be. Some mistake, some flaw. Allah is punishing us. Begum Rashida followed close behind, murmuring verses from the Quran as if reality could be erased with sacred words. When she learned she was a girl and blind, she clutched her chest, as if struck by an irreparable tragedy. A daughter, and a disabled one at that? What will people say about us? She repeated, like a mantra of shame and contempt. The following days were a drag of pain. The hospital became a freezing prison, where each medical examination was another cruel confirmation. Noor was blind. Congenital blindness, they said. Irreversible malformation of the optic nerves. Nothing could be done. No surgery. No hope. It was final. Rashid hardly appeared after that, and when he did, he barely glanced at his daughter. It was as if her presence was a constant reminder of his frustration as a man, as a father, as a Muslim. Begum Rashida was even more blunt. You have brought shame upon this house, she said bluntly one morning. Not only have you given us a daughter, you have given us a defective one. And yet, even though everyone rejected her, Noor would cry softly at night, and when I rocked her, she would be soothed by my voice alone. It was as if, even without seeing the world, she saw me, in a way no one else ever had. And it was there, in the silence of that cold maternity ward, amidst my family's rejection, that something began to shift within me. It wasn't thunder, nor a voice from heaven. It was a question. Simple, yet relentless. Is there a God who sees me, even when everyone treats me as invisible? On the third day, Rashid looked at me with a cold face and said, as if pronouncing a sentence, "This child is a curse on our family. Blind girls are a burden. Who will want to marry her? What enormous dowry will we have to offer to get someone to accept her?" His words fell on me like stones. I was already fragile, and each sentence felt like a knife. The nurses tried to be professional, offering me polite smiles and gentle pats on the shoulder, but their eyes, oh, their eyes, said everything. It was compassion mixed with pity, a silent poor woman that echoed louder than any words. But there was a different nurse. Her name was Sarah. She worked the night shift when the hospital was silent and gloomy, and her manner was different. There was genuine warmth in her eyes, not pity. Something about her comforted me without me quite understanding why. One night, as I was feeding Noor a bottle, warm milk dribbling from the corners of her mouth, Sarah approached. "Look at her," he said softly. "How she cuddles up to you. She knows you're her mother. You're her safe haven." "But she's blind," I replied, my voice breaking. "My family says this is Allah's punishment for some sin of mine." Sarah sat in a plastic chair beside my bed. Her sky-blue eyes shone with a light that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the hospital. "In my faith," she said, choosing each word carefully, "we believe that God does not punish the innocent for the sins of others. Sometimes hardships come so that His glory can be manifested in ways we don't yet understand." I stared at her in silence. "Your faith?" I asked, already guessing the answer. "I'm a Christian," she replied, without fear or shame, even though she knew that in Pakistan such a confession could be dangerous. "And I believe in a God who loves all His children unconditionally, especially those the world despises, calls weak, or says are worthless." Her words fell into my heart like a seed. Small, but alive, a curiosity I couldn't ignore, a breath of hope amid my darkness. I didn't know it yet, but those conversations would be the thread that pulled me out of the abyss. When I finally returned home with Noor in my arms, it was like entering a cold tomb. There was no joy. There was no celebration. Silence hung heavy in the air. The decorations Begum Rashida had prepared to celebrate the birth of a grandson were hastily removed, as if they had never been there. And I was placed in the smallest room of the house, in the back, away from view, as if Noor and I were a shameful secret to be hidden. The room they placed me in felt more like a cell than a home. There was only one narrow window, which looked out onto a dark alley. The walls were bare and cold, except for a single frame, a verse from the Quran pinned there, ironically speaking of Allah's mercy. That word, mercy, sounded so far from my reality that it hurt just to look at it. The first few days were the hardest. Noor hardly cried, as if sensing the tension surrounding us. At night, I rocked her in the corners of the room, whispering old lullabies my mother used to sing to me. But even in these tender moments, sadness was a constant backdrop, because no matter how much I smiled at my daughter, she would never see my face. Rashid began arriving home later and later. When I heard his footsteps echoing down the hallway, my heart beat faster, but he never stopped at our door. It was as if Noor and I had ceased to exist. Begum Rashida, on the other hand, was more direct. During family meals, she would blurt out phrases like, "Allah tests our patience with certain burdens." When someone asked about the baby, she would change the subject or whisper that the child had health problems. One day, while I was changing Noor, I overheard a conversation between Rashid and his mother in the hallway. "You should consider a second wife," Begum Rashida was saying. "This woman, first she lost 3 babies. Now she gives us a defective daughter." "I've already thought about it," Rashid replied. "I just need time to find the right family." "And what will we do with her and the girl?" her mother asked. "They are still legally under your roof. You can stay, for now," he said. As if Noor and I were a burden he'd simply agreed to carry until he found a replacement. I lay there, motionless, with Noor against my chest. The tears flowed uncontrollably and landed on her little head. Then she let out a soft sound, almost like a sweet moan. It was as if she were trying to comfort me. That night, something inside me cried out for help. Not for human help. I had already given up hope of finding that. But for any light, any sign that my life was not doomed to abandonment. That's when I decided to go back to the hospital. I found Sarah on the night shift, as before. As soon as she saw me, her face lit up with a genuine smile. "Fatima, how are you all?" "We're not okay," I replied, and it was as if a dam had broken. Everything came rushing out of me. The rejection, the stares, Rashid's harsh words, the plans for a second wife, the suffocating loneliness. Sarah listened attentively, her eyes full of compassion, as she led me to a small, quiet room away from the busy corridors. She took my hands and said softly, "Fatima, I want to tell you about someone who loves Noor exactly as she is." A lump formed in my throat. Who could love her? I asked bitterly. Not even her father can look at her without contempt. "Jesus," she replied simply. The name rang in the air like a stone dropped into a calm lake, causing ripples I couldn't control. Jesus. I'd heard that name before, yes, but always in the stories I'd heard in religious school. The Prophet Isa, a servant of Allah. Never someone personal, never someone close. "But I'm Muslim," I whispered, almost afraid to say it out loud. "I'm not asking you to change your religion," she replied with a calm smile. "I'm just talking about real, unconditional love. A love that doesn't demand perfection. A love that doesn't condemn a mother for having a blind daughter. A love that sees you, that sees Noor, and that calls you both by name." Those words weren't a sermon. They were a balm. For the first time in a long time, I felt that someone, or maybe somebody, saw me. Really. Sarah began telling me stories about Jesus. She spoke of how he touched the blind and restored their sight, how he embraced lepers no one dared approach, and how he defended women rejected by society. Each word fell on me like fresh water on parched land. "But what can he do for us?" I asked one night, my voice weary. "You can ask him yourself," Sarah replied, with that steady calm that seemed to come from somewhere else. "You don't need intermediaries. You don't need rituals. You can talk to him like you talk to a friend who loves you." Her words wouldn't leave my head. At night, when Noor finally fell asleep, I'd find myself staring at the ceiling, imagining what it would be like to speak to this Jesus Sarah spoke of so lovingly. I started small. Instead of the formal prayers I'd repeated my entire life, I began speaking softly, almost in a whisper, as if I were talking to someone who was actually there. "If you truly exist," I said in the darkness. "If you love my daughter, as Sarah says, show me. Help me understand why she was born this way. Teach me to be the mother she needs." I didn't expect to hear an answer, but something changed. Each time I said these simple prayers, a gentle peace filled the room. It wasn't like in the mosques, where everything seemed ritualistic and heavy. It was different. It was as if my words were finding attentive ears, until, one of those nights, something happened that changed everything. Noor was especially restless. She cried nonstop, despite everything I tried. Rashid banged on the wall in anger at the noise, and Begum Rashida muttered cruel phrases about disturbed babies. In the hallway, I was at my limit, desperate, alone. And then, in the depths of my despair, I did something I'd never done before. I knelt beside Noor's crib. I placed my hands over her closed eyes, and almost without realizing it, repeated the words Sarah had taught me. Jesus, if you really are the Son of God, if you really have the power to heal, please, please, let my daughter see. It was a sweltering April night. The air felt thick, heavy, like a wet blanket, a harbinger of the Pakistani monsoon. The windows of our small room were open, but not a breeze entered. The heat made me sweat, but the chill of fear was greater. Noor had been crying for over 4 hours, an inconsolable, desperate cry that seemed to come from the depths of her tiny soul. I had tried everything, changing her diaper, feeding her, rocking her until my arms ached, singing the songs my mother sang to me, but nothing worked. Her tiny fists trembled in the air, as if fighting something invisible. And with each passing minute, the crying grew louder, more broken, more heartbreaking. And there, in that suffocating heat, kneeling on the cold floor, with my daughter crying in my arms, I spoke to Jesus like I had never spoken to him before. From the next room, I heard Rashid get out of bed and punch the wall. The sound echoed through the house like thunder, cutting through the suffocating silence of the night. "Shut that child up," he shouted with a rage that seemed to come from a dark place. "Some of us need to sleep so we can work tomorrow." Each word pierced the wall like poisoned daggers, ripping into a heart already too wounded. I sat on the edge of the bed, hugging Noor to my chest. I was drenched in sweat and tears, and I could feel my own mingling with hers, a silent river of shared pain. The despair, which had been growing inside me for weeks like a poisonous plant, had finally reached its breaking point. I felt on the edge of a dark abyss. "I don't know what to do anymore, my little one," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I don't know how to help you, how to free you from this suffering." And then suddenly, I remembered Sarah's words, the story she told me about Jesus, the one who touched blind beggars on the dusty streets and healed them, the one who embraced the rejected without fear, the one who loved the forgotten of the world. Amid my despair, these memories emerged like a faint flame, an unexpected light in the darkness. With shaky legs, I stood and carefully placed Noor in her makeshift crib, a simple cardboard box lined with soft blankets. She continued to cry, her little eyes tightly closed as they had been since birth, as if refusing to face a world that had already rejected her before she could even smile. I knelt beside the crib, the cool marble against my knees, and for the first time in my life, I spoke to someone other than Allah. "Jesus!" My voice came out in a barely audible whisper, trembling like a leaf in the wind, mingling with Noor's sobs. "Sarah told me you love children, especially the ones the world rejects, the ones no one wants." My hands trembled as I reached out to hold my daughter. Everything I had learned, my religion, my culture, my tradition, screamed that I was committing blasphemy, that it was wrong, that I might be damning my soul. But a mother's desperate cry was louder than any doctrine, more powerful than the fear of punishment. "If you are truly who Sarah says you are," I continued, tears streaming like hot rivers down my face, "if you truly have the power she says you do, please have mercy on my innocent baby." I placed my hands over Noor's closed eyes, feeling the softness of those tiny, moist lids. Suddenly, her crying began to lessen, not because I was rocking her or singing, but as if something in the air had shifted, as if a silent presence had entered that stuffy room. "She didn't do anything wrong," I whispered, my voice almost broken. "She's innocent. If anyone deserves punishment, it's me. But please, don't let her suffer for my mistakes." There, kneeling on the cold floor, my hands on my daughter, my tears became a prayer. It wasn't a ritualistic, memorized prayer. It was the raw cry of a broken soul. For the first time, I spoke to Jesus not as a distant story, but as someone alive, present, able to hear. If the Lord can truly heal the blind, as Sarah told in the stories. My voice trembled, almost a broken whisper. "Please allow my daughter to see the light of this world." As I spoke, something shifted in the room. It wasn't just the sultry Pakistani night. The air in the room seemed denser, yet lighter at the same time. A presence I couldn't see with my eyes, but felt in every fiber of my body. A different warmth, Not the suffocating heat of summer, but something alive, comforting, gentle, greater than anything I'd ever experienced in mosques or memorized prayers. "In the name of Jesus," I murmured, struggling to remember the words Sarah had used when she taught me to pray. "I humbly ask you, heal my daughter. Open her eyes so they may see the light you created." I knelt there, my hands on Noor's tiny eyelids, waiting, not daring to breathe. My heart was beating so fast it felt like it was about to burst inside my chest. For a moment that felt like an eternity. Nothing happened, only her crying, which slowly faded into small sobs. And then, the inexplicable. Slowly, like a flower opening in the sun, Noor's eyelids began to lift. First a millimeter, then another. I blinked, thinking it was my tired imagination. But no, they were really opening, revealing something I'd never seen before. When, finally, her eyes opened fully, I gasped. They were no longer the dull, distant eyes I'd known from the hospital, but lively, brown, bright eyes, filled with a light that had never been there before. Trembling, I moved my hand slowly in front of her face. To my surprise, her eyes followed the movement, focusing on my face clearly. "My God," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "My God, she can see." Noor looked at me and, for the first time since birth, smiled. Not that reflexive newborn smile, but a real, knowing smile, directed at me, as if recognizing me not just as a mother, but as the woman who had fought for her. Her eyes shone as if touched by something heavenly. I gathered my daughter into my arms, my hands trembling with a mixture of joy, fear, and reverence. She continued to look at me, following every movement of my face. When I brought my finger close to her little face, her eyes focused sharply, and she tried to grasp it with her fragile little hands. "Thank you," I whispered to the cracked ceiling, knowing exactly who I was addressing. I couldn't see the presence, but it was more real than anything around me. "Thank you, Jesus. Thank you for listening to a desperate mother." I spent the rest of the night in tears of gratitude and a state of pure wonder. It was as if the whole world had changed colors. I still didn't understand everything about this Jesus Sarah spoke of, but now I was certain of one thing. He heard me. Noor slept soundly that night, for the first time in weeks. Her eyes, which could now see, closed gently as I lay awake, standing beside the crib, my heart pounding wildly between adoration and fear. Every few minutes I gently ran my hand over her eyes to make sure she was actually seeing, and even in a light sleep, her eyes followed the movement of my hand. But as the hours passed and dawn began to paint the sky with its first golden rays, a bitter brew began to grow within me. Along with joy, a cold fear was born. How would I explain this miraculous change to my family? How could I tell them that, for this to happen, I had prayed to Jesus, in a culture where abandoning Islam is not only a betrayal, but a crime that can lead to social exclusion, hatred, and even violence? I decided for now to keep it a secret. I tried to convince myself I could hide this miracle, but I knew it wouldn't be possible for long. A sighted baby behaves very differently. Soon everyone would notice that something had changed in Noor, something inexplicable. As the days passed, I watched with a mixture of joy and growing anxiety. Noor began to react to the world around her like never before. She followed my face as I moved around the room, fascinated by the shadows the sun cast on the walls. She reached out her little hands to reach the colorful mobiles hanging from the crib, reacting to the rays of light with natural, calm eye movements. It was impossible to hide such an obvious miracle, but it wasn't until a week later that the truth came out, and in the worst possible way. The revelation came during an unexpected and unwelcome visit from Rashid's sister, Yasmin. She was a nosy and malicious woman with an annoying habit of showing up unannounced, searching every corner of the house like an inspector looking for some wrongdoing. It was a sweltering Friday afternoon. I was sitting in the front room, breastfeeding Noor, while Begum Rashida left to visit a sick neighbor. Suddenly, Yasmin strode into the house with a purposeful stride, her gold bangles jingling loudly, and her silk dupatta fluttering behind her like a war flag. "Where's that troubled child?" he asked, without so much as a greeting, marching straight to where I was holding Noor, as if he had the right to inspect my daughter at any moment. Before I could react or make an excuse to push her away, Yasmin leaned forward and began making exaggerated gestures, waving her hand in front of Noor's eyes, hoping she wouldn't react, the proof that would confirm the blindness that the entire family already accepted as fact. To Yasmin's surprise, and my absolute horror, Noor's eyes followed her every gesture with astonishing precision, fixating on her face with the innocent curiosity typical of any baby. Yasmin froze, as if shocked, her mouth half open, unable to believe what she had just seen. What? How is this possible? His voice was shaky and high, filled with disbelief. At that moment, Begum Rashida walked through the door, her hands still damp from washing for the afternoon prayer. Her face already expressed immediate suspicion, a cold, distrustful look. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice sharp. Yasmin, still in shock, stammered, "The child. She can see perfectly." My daughter followed every movement, as any normal baby would. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with an almost electric tension. Begum Rashida approached with firm steps. Her eyes narrowed as she performed the same test Yasmin had done, moving her hand in front of Noor's eyes. The answer was clear, undeniable. Noor could see perfectly. "That's impossible," Begum Rashida murmured somberly, far from cheerful. "The doctor said it's permanent, unable to be cured." Could it have been a misdiagnosis? I tried to suggest, even though I knew my words sounded fragile, desperate, an attempt to avoid the worst. But Yasmin, her eyes shining with mischief, snapped. "They ran countless tests, used sophisticated equipment. What exactly did you do, Fatima?" At that moment, Rashid walked through the door, still dressed in his work clothes, the familiar scent of spices and bizarre fabrics wafting around him. "Why all the shouting?" he asked irritably, but stopped abruptly when he noticed the tense atmosphere. "Your wife did something dangerous," Yasmin accused, pointing at me as if I were a criminal. "The girl who was born blind is seeing," as if by magic. Rashid approached slowly, his face hardening. I recoiled, feeling my back hit the cold wall. He watched Noor closely, following her eye movements, and a cold expression fell over him, as if a mask of impassiveness had fallen over his features. How was this possible? His voice was low, controlled, and filled with a veiled threat. "Explain yourself now." "No lies. I don't know," I lied, holding Noor tighter against my chest, trying to shield her from the gathering storm. "It's been happening gradually over the last few days." "Things like this don't happen without a reason," Begum Rashida interrupted, her voice heavy with accusation and contempt. She seemed unable to accept that such a serious medical condition, confirmed by multiple experts as irreversible, could simply disappear. Yasmin sat on the edge of the green velvet sofa, her eyes shining with an almost amused mischief, as if she'd discovered a scandalous and delicious secret. She insinuated that I must have turned to something specific, perhaps a traditional healer, or, worse yet, something forbidden. "Maybe dark magic," he suggested venomously, as I thrashed about, refusing with all my might. I would never do something like that, but anxiety was already rising within me, flooding my voice like a merciless flood. Rashid crossed his arms, assuming that rigid posture I'd learned to fear. "So tell me, what exactly did you do? Don't lie to me that nothing happened. We know that's not true." The interrogation that followed was endless, seemingly lasting hours. They asked about secret visits, dark rituals, and pacts with occult forces. With each negative answer I gave, they became even more suspicious and furious, as if feeding a monster growing inside them. Finally, it was Begum Rashida who asked the question I dreaded most of all. "Have you been practicing any foreign religion? Do you pray to false gods?" My silence spoke louder than any words. I saw horrified understanding wash over their faces, like dark clouds gathering before a storm. The fury and fear I'd sensed since the miracle were now there, palpable. "Christianity," Yasmin whispered, as if the word were poison burning her tongue. "You've been praying to Jesus, like those infidels." I couldn't deny it anymore. Tears ran silently down my face as I nodded slowly, my resistance finally breaking under the weight of the relentless pressure. "Just once," I murmured, my voice cracking. I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do for my daughter. The reaction was immediate, violent, and terrifying. Rashid lunged at me with a fury I'd never seen in him. His hands were outstretched like claws, his face distorted with rage. Only the fact that Noor was in my arms stopped him from attacking me. "Traitor," he screamed, his voice red with hatred. "You brought a demonic curse into this house. You blasphemed us and everything our family stands for." Begum Rashida beat her chest in a dramatic gesture of lamentation. "You made our family unwitting accomplices to apostasy. What will the community say when they learn of this disgrace?" Meanwhile, Yasmin was already pulling out her phone, her fingers frantic. "I have to tell the whole family. This is too serious to hide." "No, please," I begged, my voice shaking with desperation, but it was too late. Within minutes, the news spread through the family like wildfire. My sister-in-law began making frantic calls. Each conversation seemed more dramatic than the last, every detail exaggerated, as if she were writing a soap opera script. "She's praying to Jesus, that infidel," I heard a theatrical voice on the phone. "The girl who was born blind now sees perfectly. This isn't a miracle, it's Christian witchcraft. She brought Western demons into our Muslim home." In less than an hour, the house filled with relatives, long-bearded uncles, conservative cousins, religious neighbors. They all arrived as if it were an emergency, a trial that couldn't wait. They sat in the center of the room, as if I were a criminal, forming a circle that felt more like a cage. I held Noor tightly in my arms, feeling the weight of their disapproving and fearful gaze wash over me. Rashid's older brother, Tariq, an imposing man with a long, dyed beard and cold eyes, quickly took the judge's seat. "This is clear apostasy," he declared loudly, echoing throughout the room. "She has rejected Islam to follow a foreign and inferior religion." To him, and to everyone there, this was unforgivable, a betrayal that demanded the maximum penalty. "But the child can see now," I tried to argue, holding up Noor as proof. "This is no blessing at all," one of my younger brothers-in-law snapped, pointing an accusing finger at me. "It's a curse in disguise. Christian demons have possessed this child. She needs to be purified before she contaminates the entire family." The hours that followed were a nightmare I'll never forget. They forced me to recite verses from the Quran, trying to purify me of Christian influence. They threw holy water everywhere, even bringing Samsam especially for the occasion. Men in the family tried to drive the evil out of Noor with aggressive prayers, shouting and making violent movements that left my daughter terrified and crying even more. "You must divorce her," they told Rashid unanimously. "A woman who practices apostasy cannot remain in a respectable Muslim home." "And the child?" I asked, my heart already breaking. "The child was touched by Christian demons. Who knows what else it might bring?" Begum Rashida replied matter-of-factly. "She won't take it," Tariq decreed, as if deciding the fate of some random object. "The child stays here, to be raised in the true faith, away from the corrupting influence of the apostate mother. She's leaving alone tonight," he concluded. "No!" I screamed, my voice cracking into 1,000 pieces. I held Noor so tightly that she began to cry even more desperately. They couldn't separate me from my daughter. She was all I had in this world. "You can choose your destiny," Rashid said in a cold, final voice I barely recognized. "Renounce this foreign religion completely. Return to Islam with complete submission, and perhaps we can forgive you after a period of penance. But if you persist in this path of blasphemy and betrayal, know that today you will leave this house," Rashid snapped, his voice thick with hardness, cutting through the air like a blade. "You will never set foot here again, nor will you see your daughter." The ultimatum hung heavy and implacable in the room. Begum Rashida nodded, satisfied with the ruling, while Yasmin smiled mischievously, delighted with the chaos she had caused. The men of the family, arms crossed, stared at me like predators ready to pounce. I looked at Noor, her eyes shining with a pure, innocent trust that ached in my chest. She didn't know her world was about to be turned upside down, that her future and mine would be marked by immense challenges. And in that moment, my thoughts went to Jesus, to that desperate prayer that had changed everything, to the silent peace I felt when the miracle happened. "I can't," I whispered, my voice firm, coming from deep within me. "I won't deny what I saw, what I experienced, what my heart knows to be true. Jesus healed my daughter, even when everyone here rejected her." The roar of indignation and rage that erupted was deafening, filled with veiled threats and cold stares. But before fear overcame me, before the urge to give up overcame me, I stood up, holding Noor tightly in my arms. I walked toward the door, each step taking me further away from the life I knew, from that security that had crumbled to ashes. "If this is your final and irrevocable decision," Rashid shouted, his voice thick with venom and resentment, "then you are dead to us. You have no family, no home, no nothing. Never again speak their names in this house." The sound of the door closing was a blow that marked the end of an era for me, the end of the 22 years I lived there, and the beginning of a journey full of uncertainty, but also of inexplicable hope. On that cold April night, when Noor and I left everything behind, I didn't know where to go. I walked the streets of Lahore, carrying my daughter and a small bag with what little I could carry, the money I'd secretly saved. The city lights shone, but my heart was plunged into deep shadows. My family would surely choose Rashid, and my few friends belonged to the same closed world that now rejected me. But there was one person I could trust, Sarah, the nurse who had planted a seed of faith in my heart. I arrived at Jinnah Hospital after midnight, exhausted, with Noor crying from hunger and cold. Sarah was on duty, and upon seeing me, she understood everything without needing much explanation. "You prayed to Jesus, didn't you?" he asked gently, taking Noor in his arms, his eyes full of compassion. I just nodded, unable to speak. She told me she knew about the miracle, the prayer, the expulsion, and the judgment. "Come with me," she said with conviction. "I know a safe place for you." Sarah took me to a Christian shelter on the outskirts of Lahore, a simple but welcoming place. A 2-story house, painted white, with a small garden where roses and jasmine perfumed the air. There, for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of peace and protection. When we arrived at the shelter, Rue welcomed us with open arms, despite the late hour. She was a middle-aged woman with soft, welcoming eyes, who quickly gathered Noor in her arms as I settled into a small but clean room. "She'll be safe here," Rue assured me, with a calmness that calmed me a little. "Many women like you have passed through here, women who chose to follow Jesus, even knowing the cost." The first few days were a storm of emotions. The pain of being away from my family was real, a deep wound that seemed to tear at my soul. I cried at night, not only for what I had lost, but for the uncertain future that awaited me. Yet, in the midst of this pain, I began to feel a peace I had never experienced before. Finally, I could pray without fear, without having to hide. Rue taught me more about Jesus, his love that doesn't depend on our actions, his sacrifice on the cross for us. "He understands rejection," she said one afternoon as we read the Bible in the shelter's garden. "Even his own family rejected him. The authorities persecuted him, and he was crucified for claiming to be the Son of God. But that rejection never stopped him from loving." That's how I began to learn to pray in a new way, not just asking, but talking to Jesus as if he were a close friend. I shared with him my fears, my hopes for Noor, the pain of being separated from my family, and also my gratitude for the miracle he had performed. Little by little, I felt his presence in a way I had never felt before. The shelter became my new home. There I met other women, each with a painful story that turned into hope. Miriam, a widow thrown out by her in-laws after converting. Esther, a young woman who fled an abusive marriage. Priscilla, who left prostitution and found dignity in Christ. Together, we became a family, caring for one another, sharing our burdens, and celebrating every small victory. Noor became everyone's darling, receiving the love that had previously been denied her. It was Priscilla who suggested I change my name. "Fatima's beautiful, but it's who you were," she said. "Now, you are a new creation in Christ." I chose Miriam, in honor of Moses' sister, the one who protected her brother and celebrated the liberation of the people. It seemed the perfect name for someone who now protected her daughter and celebrated her own freedom. I got a job at a textile factory that supported women from the shelter. The work was tiring, hours of sewing, but honest. It was a blessing to be able to support Noor and, at the same time, contribute to the place that welcomed me. But the biggest change happened when I started sharing my story with the other women during weekly meetings. Rue encouraged me to share how Jesus had healed my daughter. "Your testimony is powerful," she said, after my first time speaking. "God used your daughter's suffering to display his glory, and now he's using your story to touch hearts." Each time she told of Noor's desperate prayer, and how her eyes were opened when she called on the name of Jesus, she saw tears in the eyes of the women who listened. Many of them later came to me, wanting to know more about this Jesus full of love and power. Of course, not everything was easy. Threats sometimes came, anonymous phone calls, notes left on the shelter door, warnings from old acquaintances. But even through it all, I felt that God was with me, protecting me and guiding every step. One day, we found a note left at the shelter that read, "Apostates like you don't deserve to live." Rue took the threats seriously and beefed up security, but she always reminded me that fear couldn't steal my faith. "Jesus warned that following him would come at a cost," she said, "but he also promised he would never abandon us." Meanwhile, Noor grew strong and healthy. Those eyes that had been born blind now shone with life and intelligence. She was a happy little girl, surrounded by love, and seemed untouched by the trauma of the difficult months we'd lived through. One day, when Noor turned 1, I received an unexpected visitor, my younger sister, Zainab. She had managed to reach the shelter through discreet contacts. Dressed in black, nervous about being in a Christian environment, she came with a direct message. "Mommy and Daddy sent me here. They want you to know there's still time to come home," she said bluntly. I asked about Rashid. He remarried 3 months ago. His wife is 18 and already pregnant. To my surprise, the news didn't hurt me as I'd imagined it would. Instead, I felt a strange relief, as if a painful chapter in my life had closed forever. "Tell them I'm happy," I replied. "Tell them Noor is okay, that she can see, that she's loved." She looked at me, confused. "But at what price?" she asked. "I lost so many things," I confessed, holding Noor tightly. "My family, my safety, my old life. But I gained something priceless. Truth, peace, and a love that doesn't depend on anything." Zainab left without another word, but before she did, she looked at Noor, and her eyes shone with admiration. That look was living proof of the miracle that had transformed our lives. 4 years after that night that changed everything, Noor and I live in a simple house near the shelter. I work as a coordinator, helping women who, like me, are looking to start over. Noor attends a Christian preschool, where she learns, grows, and is loved for who she truly is, without having to hide her story. Every night, before she falls asleep, I gaze into her eyes, those same eyes that were once blind, and now clearly see the beauty of this world God created. And I whisper a prayer of gratitude to Jesus, who has never abandoned us. Thank you for holding us in the darkness. Thank you for showing your power in the weakness of a desperate mother. Thank you for proving that your love is stronger than any rejection, more powerful than any threat, and more enduring than any loss. Sometimes I wonder, what would have become of us if I had never met Sarah? If I had never heard of Jesus' love? If I had simply accepted that Noor's blindness was permanent? But then I look at her running in the garden, chasing butterflies, her eyes shining with life, and I know every sacrifice was worth it. Yes, the price of following Christ was high. I lost my family, my security, my former identity. But I gained something no one can take away. The freedom to be myself, the joy of seeing my daughter healed, and the peace of knowing the true God. My story continues. Each day brings new challenges, new opportunities to share this hope, and more chances to see God at work, transforming lives. The women who come to the shelter looking for a new chance, and Noor, my light, my living miracle, my daily reminder of the power of a prayer said in faith. She knows she is loved, not only by me, but by Jesus, who opened her eyes when all seemed lost. Jesus, who illuminates those who live in darkness. Thank you for never abandoning your children.